Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Derbyshire Dales District Council Community Forum to be held at Matlock this evening. I first of all need to remind you about the Matlock Town Hall evacuation if the alarm rings. The information is back and forth. And can I also remind you that we are filming and live streaming this forum this evening. Jim's told me that we won't be filling anybody's faces in the audience, but if you do have a problem with being on film, please can you speak to Jim? Thank you. First of all, I'm going to ask all the officers present to introduce themselves as we go around the table. And we've got a couple of officers on the front row, and then we'll start with the presentations and we'll have questions afterwards if you're happy to wait. So I'll start and introduce myself. I'm Susan Hobson and I'm the Deputy Leader of the District Council. And we can start from Jim at that end.
Yeah, I'm Jim Fern. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager.
Evening, I'm Steve Capes. I'm the Regeneration and Policy Director.
Good evening, I'm Karen Henriksen, the Director of Resources.
Good evening, I'm Robert Coggins. I'm Director of Housing.
Good evening, Gary Fairdeal, Leader, Derbyshire Dales District Council.
Good evening, Paul Wilson, Chief Executive.
Good evening, Ashley Watts, Director of Community and Environmental Services.
And I am last but least. I'm Rose Hesse, Neighbourhood Liaison Officer.
Thank you. I'd like now to ask Paul Wilson to give the first presentation, Good News.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I tend to always say in these types of presentations, this is really just a snapshot of good news across the council in terms of initiatives. So you may well have come across some of this news previously from the council's news releases, but hopefully there is something in here that you haven't previously heard of. So turning first to the issue of climate change. So climate change is one of the council's key corporate priorities set by the council back in 2019, and we have been doing an awful lot of work in the area of climate change since that period of time. We've been particularly successful in terms of drawing external grant funding in, the most recent of which is something called the Low Carbon Skills Funding, where we've attracted £123,000 worth of grant to assist with the decarbonisation of our leisure centres across the district. We've also been pursuing various initiatives in terms of energy efficiency in housing, and one of the projects which is just coming to a conclusion is that 70 properties have been improved with a mixture of measures, including wall insulation, solar PV and air source heat pumps. Turning to environmental health, again in respect of energy efficiency, we've recently been undertaking inspections of private rented properties, and you'll see the types of properties that we've been inspecting there and the different compliance that we've managed to achieve through the interventions that we've brought about. Our environmental health team are also extremely busy in terms of the Homes for Ukraine programme. So you will recall that this was a government initiative whereby private individuals were asked to come forward and volunteer to actually host the Ukrainian family. And I'm very pleased to say that the response from Derbyshire Dales residents has been fantastic. There are more Ukrainian families hosted in the Derbyshire Dales than any other district in Derbyshire, but that has brought a particular work stream for our environmental health colleagues as well, because we do need to make sure that the properties that those families are being hosted in are fit and appropriate and meet the necessary standards. So 169 properties have been inspected to date in respect of that. Again, something that we've recently introduced is a schools nutrition project. Clearly, in the context of a cost of living crisis, it's extremely important that school children do receive nutritious meals at school. So working with local schools, that's something that we've actually introduced recently and is going very, very well. And in terms of other environmental health work, we're now back on track in terms of the interventions regarding the Food Standards Agency. Clearly, there was a period of time through the COVID pandemic where we weren't able to inspect properties, but now we're back on track with that particular initiative. Estates and facilities, again, one of the council's corporate priorities to actually enhance and replace various assets owned by the district council across the district. A number of works have either taken place or in the course of taking place. In particular, the Ashbourne Bandstand, which is due to be replaced, and also you may well have noticed the scaffolding around the Matlock clock tower in Hall Lease Park, so that's undertaking some refurbishment as well. We've also concluded grant funding for various decarbonisation works at the Town Hall and at the Agricultural Business Centre, again working towards the Council's ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. We've recently embarked upon a review of our local plan. There's a local plan consultation out at the moment. This is really quite significant for the Derbyshire Dales, given the fact that housing and how we accommodate housing growth across the district is always a contentious subject. So the consultation is inviting public views on a different range of options, including the potential new village within the district, potential for sustainable urban extensions, and also the type of growth dispersal that we should actually pursue in the new local plan around existing towns and villages. So we're very grateful for those persons who have participated today, but we would welcome anybody who hasn't contributed today to please do so. And there are details on the Council's website as to how you may participate in that consultation. As we near the end of the Council's administration, focus is now turning towards the development of a new corporate plan with a new administration which will be elected in May of next year. I'm very pleased to say that of the corporate ambitions set by the Council back in 2019-20, we are very much on track in terms of delivering all of those. So despite the fact that we've had 2 years of a COVID pandemic and the significant disruption that brought about, we are in a very good position to actually deliver on the commitments that the Council made at that time. Again, one of our corporate priorities is economic regeneration, and we've recently received from government something called the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which is effectively an additional grant on top of the £2.7 million granted to the district through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So £748,000 in addition to that will help us to support various business initiatives across the Derbyshire Dales, and the Council has recently approved an action plan in terms of exactly what those measures will comprise. One of the key initiatives which we've developed is the Levelling Up Fund. So again, this is an initiative launched by central government, and the District Council resolved that Ashbourne will be the focus of our Levelling Up Fund. So we have submitted a couple of months ago now a £15 million town centre regeneration programme for Ashbourne. There's a possibility we may actually hear the result of this later this week. Fingers crossed, if that's successful, then you will start to see some significant improvements take place across Ashbourne, working in partnership with the County Council, various other public and private sector organisations. So a really exciting package of proposals there to further enhance that market town. District Council is very proud of our housing team and the achievements that it's delivered over many, many years, particularly in regard to the provision of affordable housing. As we continue to embark upon our own council housing programme, we've also been recognised in terms of a national shortlisting as part of the UK Housing Awards for Council of the Year. So that's something which reflects upon not just the housing team but the whole of the District Council in terms of how collectively we work together to deliver improved outcomes across the district. So fingers crossed, we will hopefully be successful when those awards are announced. Turning now to the economy side of things, Matlock Bath Illuminations is something which I'm sure residents are very familiar with, and despite the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, which resulted in one of the weekends being cancelled, the success this season has been tremendous. Once again, record visitor numbers, tickets sold out in record time, and it really is a boost to the Matlock Bath economy, the general central area economy, but also the rest of the Derbyshire Dales. So that's something that we're incredibly proud of. It couldn't be possible without the magnificent contributions of the boat builders, but once again, a great event that was delivered at the back end of the summer season. In terms of our neighbourhoods teams, they've been very active on a whole range of initiatives, including community events in Ashbourne focused around antisocial behaviour awareness. We've undertaken various sports development activities, holiday activity and food programmes. The Derbyshire Dales Walking Festival, again, a tremendous success this year, 64 people taking part in that. Wellbeing festivals, again, raising the importance of wellbeing, particularly in the context of the current challenges that everybody faces. So we're very pleased to play our part in terms of improving the health and wellbeing of residents across the whole of the district. CCTV may be considered perhaps an unusual topic to cover as part of these types of briefings, but there's a very important message here in that unfortunately we have seen a number of incidents of antisocial behaviour in and around our facilities, principally the toilet blocks in the main towns. There's also been concerns regarding the safety of women and girls. So the council has taken the decision to invest in additional CCTV facilities at those particular locations, not only to raise awareness of the fact that we will be monitoring people and any damage that they may wish to cause, but also hopefully improving the safety of the users of those facilities as well. Now, that's not just something that the District Council is playing its part on. This is something being driven by the Chief Constable of Derbyshire Police, so we're very pleased to play our part as part of a much wider project. Waste and recycling. So the council recognises the significant disruption that our residents have encountered during the last 18 months in terms of the waste and recycling service. Thankfully, that service is now back on track. It is delivering a reliable service once again, but one of the consequences of that is that the very good rates of recycling that the District Council previously encountered have declined in the last 18 months or so. So we're actually embarking upon a series of initiatives, one of which is trying to improve recycling through schools education, but also various initiatives throughout our communities to try and get that recycling rate back up and make sure that the District Council is again one of the top performing councils in the country. Resources, again, might be a slightly unusual topic to cover, but given the challenges that many residents face in terms of the household incomes, it's extremely important that the District Council actually pays grant claims and processes changes to claims as quickly as it possibly can in order to make sure that funding goes to the people who are greatest in need. So the table on the slide there indicates the performance of Derbyshire Dales against the East Midlands, against England and against Great Britain. You can see that on both the number of days taken to process new claims, but also changes to existing claims, we are performing extremely well. Again, really important. We put a lot of emphasis into this to make sure that our residents do receive the support that they need as quickly as possible. In terms of the forms of that support, clearly we've recently had responsibility for processing grants in terms of the energy support scheme introduced by national government. Over £3.36 million of mandatory energy rebates have been paid to over 22,000 households. So again, something that's really important to us, and we do put a lot of effort in to make sure that that money gets distributed as quickly as it possibly can. District Council is incredibly proud of its parks and gardens, and as part of a recent initiative to improve the signage in our parks and gardens, we have installed new signage in all of our key facilities. The signage has been paid by sponsorship monies attracted from other initiatives the District Council embarks upon, so there's no council tax money been spent on this improved signage, but hopefully it will actually improve the visitor experience. We've also taken the opportunity to publicise our new initiatives around the public space protection orders, and hopefully it gives credit to the District Council for the maintenance of those parks and gardens, which, as I say, we're very proud of. Council website is perhaps the most significant way in which we communicate with our residents and which our residents and businesses access services. So we've recently been embarking upon a very comprehensive refresh of the website, which is due to be launched in January. So this not only looks to improve the content of the website, but also improve the accessibility of that for people who may have visual or other impairments. This was something that we were required to do by government, and we've now achieved a very impressive 97% compliance rate. Still some way to go yet, but that new website will hopefully provide much better quality information, easier to interact with, and much more accessible to the residents and businesses across the Derbyshire Dales. So that was it in terms of good news, Chair. Hope there was something in there which residents found of value.
Thank you very much, Paul. And you're with the second presentation, telling us all about the mayoral combined county authority devolution deal. Thank you.
Yeah, so this may be something which residents have come across through local media reports. So just to try and set the context around this, the upper tier authorities, that is Derbyshire County Council, Derby City Council, Nottinghamshire County Council and Nottingham City Council, have for some time harboured ambitions to have a mayoral combined authority to rival that exists in the West Midlands, Greater Manchester, Merseyside and one or two other areas around the country. Through negotiations that have been conducted with government over the summer, a deal was formally announced at the back end of August. That deal is subject to a process of consultation which is currently underway. It also requires formal ratification of those authorities which has now been given, and also the progressing of the relevant legislation through parliamentary approval. So all that is currently in train. But what that will mean is that potentially there will be mayoral elections in May of 2024, and prior to that there will be some shadow arrangements put in place. If it all goes through, this will be the first mayoral combined county authority, that is a mayoral authority which crosses two-tier local government of counties and districts. There's no other example anywhere in the country, so Derbyshire will be the first in this respect. And the whole purpose of this is that it's an opportunity to build and enhance the relationship with government over a period of time. So what does it all mean? In terms of the initial negotiations that have been undertaken, I won't read through that, but effectively there's a significant amount of additional funding which will be devolved from national government to the local level. And decisions on how that funding should be utilised will be taken at the local level by that mayoral combined authority. And clearly the intention is that that will be better directed to the priorities of the residents across the Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire geography. In terms of the functions that the mayor will have, there are certain functions which are specified in the legislation. They include the power to designate a mayoral combined development area. They will have housing and land acquisition powers to bring about regeneration. There is the power to set a precept on council tax to fund mayoral functions. That will clearly be subject to political agreement. The power to charge business rate supplements and various other powers, particularly related to local transport plans and particular bus franchising. There are also additional powers that can be given in terms of economic development and regeneration, adult education, skills, transport functions, housing supply, and powers to borrow for non-transport functions. The important message here is that there are no district council functions which can be removed from the district council and taken by the mayoral combined authority without the explicit agreement of the district council. So this isn't in any way a power grab, because the mayor cannot take any powers from the council. Only the council can cede powers to the mayor should it choose to do so. So I think that's a very important message in terms of the district council will retain its own sovereignty and influence over the functions that it currently delivers. I've covered some of this already, but as I say, it is going through Parliament in terms of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. There's been quite a few changes to that bill already, some of which has recently been announced in the media. But the key thing is it is all about bringing new powers and funding down to the local level. That directly lets the mayor, the intention being that there would be added value, there will be improvements to existing governance arrangements, and it will be bringing powers from that national level with local influence exerted across the geography of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. In terms of what the District Council's influence will be within this, the four upper tier authorities will be the constituent authorities, so they will have a permanent place, if you like, round the mayoral combined authority cabinet table. District representation will be in the form of 4 representatives, 2 to be drawn from Derbyshire and 2 to be drawn from Nottinghamshire, and the voting will be determined by the mayor in terms of how those particular arrangements will work for those district and borough representatives. So they won't be entitled to a vote on every single matter, but the mayor can determine those matters where a vote would be permitted. The actual details of how those representatives will be elected is yet to be finalised. And this really is a timeline of where we are. So it's been a rapid phase of activity to get to the current status. However, that deal has now been agreed in principle. The shadow authority, subject to legislation passing, will come into effect in April of 23, and then the mayor will be elected in May of 24. And if anybody wishes to find out any more about this, there's various resources on the County Council's website, also the website East Midlands Devolution.co.uk, and the consultation is open until the 9th of January. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. I now ask Rob Coggins to speak about the cost of living crisis.
Thanks. Okay, good evening. This is the third time I've done this presentation. It doesn't get any easier talking about the cost of living crisis. And I think we've all seen in the news and headlines how people are affected. And I'll try and bring some sense to that and what we're doing about it through these few slides. So you don't need me to tell you about how, what caused the cost of living crisis and how it's impacting on people particularly. But obviously, post-COVID and the impact of various economic changes that have happened are having an impact on residents across the country. So we know things like energy bills are going up, fuel and food costs more, mortgage interest rates are changing, and also private rents are changing as well. They're going up. Some areas, I'm sure we'll see changes in council tax, and day to day, many other things are going up for people, which are affecting how much money they have in their pocket to spend on things they want to do. So, in terms of what does that mean locally, and what the government doing about it, we know the various support packages have been put in place. The cost of living payment has obviously gone out to residents through different forms. The cost of living payment for disabled families as well. There's a household support fund, which probably hasn't hit the headlines, but I'll go into a bit more detail in that later. There are changes happening to national insurance. I'm sure you're aware of that as well, and things around universal credit, etc. So lots of different changes being announced by government to support people. And some of that is directly delivered through us. Some's happened through the Treasury directly, or through people's payslips, or through their benefit claims. So quite a range of different support systems have been put in place. There are practical help available for people, and they come in different places and different sources. And again, I didn't think I'd be talking about TV shows that provide advice on debt, etc. But people access information in many different ways. Some will rely on what they see on TV. Others will go to websites. There are some examples there. I always look at Martin's Money Tips because there are all sorts of things on there which are helpful to people to get a margin on something or some help to gain financially. So if it's I think the latest one was one of the banks has got a linked account that did 7% interest on your savings. Nobody's seen that for a long time, I'm sure. But there are things out there that can help people make the money go a little bit further. In terms of practical help locally, obviously there are key agencies that we work with, particularly through the housing team and our wider corporate work to support residents. Probably the most notable of those is the CAB. So people would regularly approach the CAB for advice around a whole range of things, from employment support, benefits and debt. And we actually provide additional funding to the CAB to provide additional debt advice for residents in the Dales. And typically over the course of a year, they'll support an extra 150 to 200 people with debt advice issues. And together with Age UK and our own in-house services, we affect about £1.5 million of debt or benefit income per year across about 400 households. So we're making quite significant impacts and benefit gains for people that are in need. And you can see from the figures there about Age UK, those staff that Age UK employ are funded from the reduced discount that used to apply to second homes. So working with the county council, we recycle that funding, that council tax, back to the district council to help people that are vulnerable and need additional advice and support. So through Age UK, they employ about 3.5 to 4 people to provide that additional one-to-one support for older residents. And that takes a lot of the weight off our housing team because they're the first port of call for residents that are older and need that additional help and advice. The other thing that's happening quite a lot locally, and you've all seen it in the news, I'm sure, and maybe even know people that rely on food banks. Again, when I came into housing, I didn't think we'd be feeding people, which we are. And so the local food banks through Jigsaw and the food pantry on Hurst Farm are serving a lot of people each week. The Hurst Farm Food Bank has 350 members on a subscription-based model, and they're feeding about 85 families a week, which has taken the pressure off the other local food banks to feed people. And it's quite humbling if you go to a meeting up at the the Farmers View, as it is now, the old social club, on a Tuesday or a Thursday, and you see people that we're actually feeding as a council through that agency and that partnership. And that's quite humbling, I think. But we are doing, obviously, something very positive for those people there. When you walk through the supermarket aisles, there's always a box at the end to drop off food items, and just supporting that and our local charity shops that then recycle that money through sales to support residents and their output in terms of advice and action for vulnerable people is really quite powerful. So it might seem quite a small thing to do, to put a box of cornflakes or whatever it is into that donation box, but it does help and goes back into the local food banks. Other practical help I mentioned at the beginning includes our own housing advice and support service. So this year to date, we've seen 575 households approach us as homeless. That's quite a lot in a year. We're not even through the full year. About half of those we've prevented becoming actually homeless, and the rest we will be supporting to find accommodation with housing associations and private landlords. So anybody that's in need of advice and support can access us through the reception, or obviously online, or via the phone. We've been a key point in the delivery of the Household Support Fund, which I mentioned earlier. That's not hit the headlines nationally, but locally the County Council were allocated £5.4 million to spend on a range of things that would prevent people becoming homeless, or those that were struggling with utility or debt or food bills, etc. And we've been allocated, the districts and boroughs across Derbyshire have been allocated a proportion of that funding, and in the 3 rounds to date, which will end at the end of March next year, we'll have assisted over 700 households, distributing £400,000 in grant to people, and that's gone directly into their rent account, for example, to avoid eviction from a housing association. It's gone into buying white goods, into carpets to help people move into properties where they've got no money at all to furnish a property, basically. And so this is a really key tool for us to help people that are vulnerable in difficult circumstances. The Chancellor's announced there'll be 2 further rounds next year. And again, we'll be working with our County Council colleagues to make sure that we rapidly bring that money to bear on people that are in housing need. Just to come to the end of the presentation, of course, there are mental health needs that are coming through the community. People are concerned and worried about their future, perhaps, or the money in their pocket, what they can do locally to look after themselves. And there are lots of services available around supporting people with their mental health. And both the County Council and ourselves provide information on our websites. The County Council link is there that gives more information on the cost of living and where you can get access to information to support people that you might come into contact with. Finally, warm spaces is something that we know has been in the news a lot, and people in the room, I'm sure, know more about it than I do, but communities have come together to provide warm spaces. My team were in Bradwell this morning, which isn't on the list, looking for housing sites for affordable housing, and while they were there in the village hall, people were coming in to get a hot drink and have a natter and a bite to eat. And so the community is coming together to provide a support network for people that would otherwise be quite cold at home. And looking at the forecast next week, that's going to become even more important as we head into a cold snap. So again, more information is available on our own website there, where you can get information and advice on cost of living and other issues around warm spaces.
Thank you, Rob. I'd now like to ask James McLaughlin to talk about ward boundary changes.
Thank you, Chair. This won't be the most exciting topic you'll hear tonight, but it is quite important. Some of you might be thinking about elections coming up in May of next year. Others of you won't be thinking about it. It's not really the time of year to be thinking about elections. But what I'm going to talk about here sets the context for how the elections will run when we get to May. So I recognise that some of you aren't students of the game, so what I'll do is I'll set out the context of the review that the Boundary Commission did. So a review comes about to decide how many councillors are actually needed at an authority, how many wards there should be, where the boundaries should be, and what those wards should be called. And finally, the review makes a decision as to how many councillors should represent each ward. So those three components are part of that process. The review is carried out by the Local Government Boundary Commission for England, and they have three main considerations when undertaking a review. So the first of those is improving electoral equality by equalising the number of electors that each councillor represents, ensuring that the recommendations they make reflect community identity, and providing arrangements that support effective and convenient local government. So when they make their recommendations, their task is meant to be to strike the best balance between those three considerations. I think there are differing views as to how that's been achieved and whether they have achieved that, but that's their stated intent when they undertake a review. So as part of the review that started here in 2020, the Boundary Commission determined that there was a requirement to review the number of councillors. There was electoral inequality because there was more variance between councillors as to the numbers of electors they were. The first stage of the process in 2020 commenced with a discussion with the council, and then the Boundary Commission making a decision around what the future size of the council should be. So those of you who take keen interest in this authority will know that there are currently 39 district councillors. From May of next year, that number will reduce to 34, so we have a reduction of 5. Having concluded that stage of the review, they then undertook consultation on what the warding arrangement should look like. They published their own draft recommendations in February of last year, and then after making a discovery of around 2 or 3 errors in that, they had to publish a new report setting out new recommendations, and then that was finalised earlier this year. So Parliament has now concluded the process of the review. Those changes have been accepted and they'll be implemented for the elections in May of next year. So moving on to what has changed, the number of electoral wards in the district will reduce from 25 to 21. For anybody interested working on the count on the 5th of May, that will make it slightly easier in terms of the district council count. From an officer perspective, I'm quite pleased about that, but we'll have plenty of parishes to keep us busy as well as the district, I'm sure. As I say, the number of district councillors will reduce from 39 to 34, and in practical terms, that means we will have 13 single councillor wards, 3 two-councillor wards, and 5 three-councillor wards. And in terms of that point about electoral equality, the average number of electors per councillor will increase from 1,709 to 1,806. I think it's fair to say that all wards in the district have been affected in some way by the recommendations made by the Boundary Commission. That might mean that your ward has changed, or the name of the ward that you're currently in will have changed. In this area, previously it's been Matlock, St Giles and Matlock All Saints. That's changing. It'll be Matlock East and Tansley and Matlock West. And there are various other changes that I'll bring up on the next slide. Well, the key thing is to just be aware that there could be some impact in terms of where you're voting when it comes to May of next year. So there's a map of the district that it's not particularly helpful in terms of setting out where the changes are, but it does set out exactly what those new boundaries look like. What I would recommend is that you go onto the District Council's website and take a closer look at that map. It's available in our democracy section. There's also links to the Boundary Commission's website, so please do take a look at it in closer detail. The map on the Boundary Commission's website is particularly helpful to focus in and drill down on particular parish areas or wards. So why are we talking to you about this now? I've just calculated that we're 150 days away from the 4th of May, which is when the local elections will be held. I hadn't realised it was that near in terms of days, so that's quite alarming. But importantly, there's not a lot of time to be prepared if you're intending to participate in the election, whether that's as an elector. We've published the new register of electors last week on the 1st of December. That doesn't mean you can't register to vote. You can always register to vote at any time, and I encourage you to go to that website, www.gov.uk, registered to vote. If you haven't registered already, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, go there and you'll be able to do it. And for those of you who are interested in standing for election, and you may well be, you're committed citizens, you've come out on a cold night in December to listen to us talk, and you've got a keen interest in what the council's up to. So if you are interested in standing as a candidate or being an agent for a candidate, then we are starting to put in place dates for briefings for candidates and agents where we'll set out how the elections will work. So we'll publish those on our website, and we'll probably get some press releases out to let people know as and when they're taking place. I think in terms of some further information, I've put that link in about standing for election. That link on the Local Government Association website is very useful. But if you've got any specific queries, then contact the elections team at electoral@derbyshiredales.gov.uk, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I appreciate, Chair, that's not a very interesting topic, but if anyone's got any questions afterwards, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I'd like to pass now to Ashley Watts, who's going to talk about our waste collection service.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very short presentation. It's just to raise residents' awareness of a piece of work that's been undertaken at the moment, and that is to optimise the rounds that are undertaken currently by Serco's refuse collection vehicles and crews. As Paul mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've experienced some significant disruption on the contract this time round. And previously we enjoyed really good performance and a good service from Serco. Unfortunately, it hit some difficulties when we renewed the contract 2 years ago. That being said, we are working hard to try and get the contract back to where it was before. In the sense of recycling rates, we've always done very well in the Derbyshire Dales in terms of recycling. We know that it's something that's important to our residents, and 3 years ago we were 8th in the country in terms of performance, and last year, despite the disruption, we dropped down to 31st out of 338 councils, but we're climbing that league table again. We are working with residents and schools to improve the service, but most importantly, we're working with our contractor to make sure that we don't see any more disruption like we've experienced in that first 18 months. And this is one aspect of that. So the reason that we're doing this piece of work really is to identify any inefficiencies in those rounds. And that could be as a result of new developments coming on board, new properties, changes in road layouts, or unfortunately, similar to what we experienced at the beginning of this year, a closure of a disposal site that we've used for a number of years. For those of you who don't know, we used to take our organic waste, or garden waste, food waste, down to Vital Earth in Ashbourne, but unfortunately, at the back end of last year, it was subject or suffered a fire, and despite attempts to get the site operational again, unfortunately, it had to close. That had a huge impact on how we dispose of our waste, because there were very few, if any, disposal sites that we were able to take our organic waste to, so we've had to split where that goes. What that does then is impact on the rounds that the crews are undertaking, because they have to tip off at the end of the day. Those sites close at a particular time. So what that did, it put even more pressure on the completion of rounds and in terms of the number of properties that we were collecting from each day. So we're looking at trying to improve that. That work is very much underway. What it will also do will help reduce the travel time, but also the carbon emissions. The council has declared a climate change emergency, as have many other authorities, so we're doing our best to reduce those emissions. This work will go some way to helping with that. We also changed the fleet on the new contract back in the back end of 2020 to give us some more flexibility. You'll all be very much aware that the Derbyshire Dales offers its challenges to get around in some of the larger vehicles, so we've had to introduce smaller vehicles that can access smaller roads, narrower roads, tighter bends. Also, we have some areas where we are seeing a slight change in behaviour since COVID, where we've got a lot of parked cars, so we need narrower vehicles to get down some of those roads. All of that is being factored into this round optimisation project. Essentially, it should improve the collection service, prevent large number of miscollections or delays in service. It will reduce the carbon footprint. It will balance the workloads for the crews. Currently, Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays are really heavy rounds. So it gives some balance to those, again, to help make sure that collections are completed on those days. What do you need to do? Well, nothing really. We're making you aware of it at this stage. There'll be a promotional campaign early next year explaining what is likely to change. It will affect quite a number of properties if we go ahead with it as we're intending to at the moment. So we will make you aware. It will be on the council social media streams. It will be on a website. It'll go out in the e-newsletters. It will go out through Dales Matters, and those properties whose day changes will be affected will be notified by a letter or a leaflet through their door. What we have stipulated to Serco is that we do not want to see day changes that result in bins being collected on different days. So if your recycling is collected on a Thursday, for example, we expect that the domestic waste will be collected on the following Thursday. We don't want a change. We don't want any complications. We want to try and keep it as simple and as clean as we possibly can. This is likely to come into effect at the back end of spring, early summer next year, but we will keep you up to speed with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ashley. And our final presentation is from Karen Henriksen in Budget Consultation and Priorities. Thank you, Karen.
Good evening. So the council, as residents, is facing budgetary pressures arising from rising inflation and increased energy costs. But we also have uncertainties about levels of future government funding. So to take those in turn, like you, we're facing rises in inflation. These are particularly affecting our contracts, such as the contract with Serco for waste collection. An increase of 10% on that would amount to over £300,000 a year. So that's a significant additional cost for us. In terms of energy costs, we've been advised that our energy bills could go up 300%. And while we have done some energy saving measures in leisure centres and so on, we are facing increased costs there. In terms of government funding, we don't expect to hear about our funding levels for next year until the week before Christmas. We have to set the council tax for next year, the first week in March. So in reality, we only have about 6 weeks from early January until mid-February to analyse the content of the funding settlement and to prepare our reports and give advice to members about the level of the council tax for next year. At the moment, at best, we're expecting to receive the same amount of grant as we did this year, but it will probably be less. And even if we receive the same amount of grant that we did this year, it'll be a real terms cut in funding, especially given inflation. So we've estimated at the moment that inflationary increases amount to £1.3 million. And that's around about 10-12% of our net revenue spending. So it is a significant cost for us, and it will be difficult for us to meet that. The council does have a legal duty to set a balanced budget, and as you can imagine, difficult decisions may have to be made. Given the timescale that we've got between receiving the settlement and setting the budget, it's most likely that for 2023-24, the next financial year, we'll have to use reserves to balance our budget, but that wouldn't be sustainable. So during 23-24, we'll be working up a plan to make longer-term sustainable savings. The cost of living is rising. We know that most residents are facing financial pressures and uncertainty too. And we know that you won't really want us to increase council tax or fees and charges, but that might be something that we've got to consider in order to balance our budget. So difficult decisions will have to be made. We're planning a resident survey, which is due to start in January. That will include questions about budgets. It will ask which services are most important to you as residents, which ones you want us to prefer, which ones you'd prefer us to spend more on, and which you prefer us to spend less on. And we intend to use the results of that survey as part of our medium-term budget planning during 23-24. So it is important to us that you take part. As I say, that will then give the councillors information to work up a balanced budget and council tax level for 23-24, or more importantly for 24-25. And if you wish to take part in the survey, it'll be on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you to all our officers for their presentations. We're going to have some questions now from you all. If you'd like to raise your hand when you want to say a question. Ross, have we got a microphone, or are we going to rely on people speaking loudly?
Jim, were you okay with
The level of sound, that's fine. Who's first then? Who'd like to speak first? Thank you.
Michael, that councils won't subject to mandatory numbers of new homes. Derbyshire Dales District Council reconsider the huge number of cases in the local plans for Matlock, Ashbourne, Workston, etc. They also be taken into consideration the peak park effect and apply for a reduction in number of these.
I'm aware of the Michael Gove's statement, of course, but it's fresh off the press and we need to see the exact detail. But we certainly will take a close look.
Surely you must have more to say than that.
I don't think I can until we see the specifics of Michael Gove, and our officers need to sit and see where we're exactly at with our numbers. We've got some build in train, we've got some planning applications in train, so we have to gauge what our numbers are in respect of the 5-year housing numbers. So I can't give a definitive answer at the moment, but I can promise that our officers obviously will look at Michael Gove's statement.
But he's talking about different criteria, isn't he?
Well, he is.
He's talking about beauty and appropriateness, all those sorts of things.
Yes, and that is in fact in train as well. I lead a Vision Derbyshire team with David Arnold, the Chief Planning Officer at Derbyshire County Council, with all the other Derbyshire planners, senior planners, have produced an SPD document already on climate change relative to new homes build. We're now moving on to the second phase, which is design and the environment. Design beautiful. And that is going to be in conjunction with NOTS as well, leading towards the shadow cabinet that will be set up for the East Midlands Mayoral Combined Authority. I was at a meeting in Nottingham yesterday, in actual fact, on the Vision Derbyshire meeting, and had talks with close colleagues in Nottingham. And we're very intent on getting this design process and better environment rather than having to build numbers. So we want to move away from numbers, and in a sense I hear what Michael Gove is saying, but at the same time we have to recognise there are people out there that still want the keys to the new home. So these have to be put in the melting pot, and all I can assure you, and I repeat, is we will certainly look at that, but I need to see this. I haven't seen the letter from Michael Gove yet, I've only seen the press release. So we need to see the specifics of that. I don't know if...
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. I don't know if Paul wants to speak or Rob wants to make any comment. Nothing more to add.
The local plan. To the fact that the area. They tend to look at local applications in isolation, and there are unacceptable pressures being put on our local services because of this failure to look at the whole picture. So we have undercapacity with drainage, huge concerns related to roads and other infrastructure. In the village I live, we've got in excess of 100 houses coming, well, at this moment in time. And that 100 houses be no cumulative No one has said there are that many houses, how is it going to affect the village? They've just said we're doing 25, or 59, we're doing another 25, and throughout the plan area. So I don't think you're looking at MPPF correctly, because you are supposed to be considering people that are existing, living in the community. It is not apparent.
As Mrs. Rains knows, I think the responsibilities of the planning authority is that we have to consider individual planning applications on their own merits, but in doing that, we're clearly reliant upon the input of statutory consultees, which cover many of the issues that you've identified: highways, drainage, infrastructure in terms of health facilities, school facilities. So you are correct insofar as all of those issues are important, but the authority is dependent upon those relevant agencies who deliver those functions, advising us as to what the cumulative impact of development is likely to be on their ability to continue to accommodate growth in those. So, something that has happened for many, many years in terms of schools, the Education Authority will advise whether a development will require additional school places, and there are established measures in place to deal with that. The same happens with health facilities. I think the point that residents are concerned about is that the pace of housing growth has far exceeded the pace by which those facilities have also grown to deal with that additional demand. And that is a very valid point. And that is something that we are clearly working with the relevant authorities on to try and address. But they're not matters completely within the control of the District Council. We are reliant upon the advice that we get from those agencies, and the improvements to those facilities are often outside the direct control of the District Council. So all we can do is try and work in partnership and influence them, but the delivery of improvements is not something we have direct control over.
Very quickly, if I may. I'm afraid I can't accept that, because we've got a development going ahead already where I live, and is recommended refusal. They also said roads were not acceptable, and your officers, councillors, whether they, one doubts they had, but your officer recommended overruling highways. Overruling Derbyshire County Council with a contribution for Highfield School. So I'm sorry, this might be a rogue planning. Basically, Derbyshire Dales are ultimately responsible for everything that goes on. As you say, they are statutory consultees, and you can ignore them. Experience in the village I live in is that you have it.
Well, the role of the planning authority is to determine those applications, and there will always be competing considerations, and the planning committee will have evaluated those considerations and arrived at a decision. That decision may not be universally popular to all, but nonetheless they will have considered the relevant considerations and come to a balanced view. That's the role of the planning committee.
Thank you, Paul. Mrs. Rains, can I just say we're better not to speak about specific planning applications.
I just want to add, Chair, if I may. I was a member of that planning committee, and the planning committee robustly tested the officers on highways refusal, because it's a rare event, but the planning committee did test that, and that's the democratic process. So whether you like the planning committee decisions or not, I think it's a case of which side of the fence you're on.
Thank you, Councillor Petty.
Yes, sort of linked with that. My question is concerning a planning application, which is in the process of being sorted, for 450 houses, which is rather a special area behind us at the top of the hill, 600 feet above Matlock. And above that, 100 feet above that, is a strip of woodland, which has got lots of springs in it, which is water. Now, it's a big topic, this is water. It floods the town, as we well know, and causes many problems in Bentley Brook. I believe the only reason the Wolds is being considered for development is so that Derbyshire Dales can meet this requirement of more houses, despite being built on a very unsuitable area. Recently, Naomi Doherty, project manager for that wonderful lifting McShifty in the river, to rebuild the wall, she said, this wall will not solve all the problems. This was because Matlock flooded for several different reasons. She also said the floods are a number of different sources and people have highlighted surface water impacts. In 2021, consultants were asked for a flood risk report. That showed that the highest risk of catchment of the whole of Derbyshire Dales, yes, it was in Bentley Brook and the Wolds. The hydrogeology of the Wolds is complex, as we all know, and the local community has been ignored. Crossing the fields below my garden now than when I moved to Bentley Close 25 years ago. Even when the temperature was at 40 degrees, and it was hot, as we all remember, I could see and hear the water running down at the bottom. This is only a small part of the problem of what's up there. My feeling is it's just not been taken seriously. With government reducing the required number of new houses, which is what we mentioned, the consequential risks with building on the Wolds raised by the Environment Agency, the Severn Trent's not happy, the Wildlife Trust's not happy, and lots of other organisations. I would like the district, the local authority, to reconsider the development of the Wolds and withdraw it from the local.
Thank you for your comments and your questions. I'm not sure we can comment on an individual planning application, but perhaps Paul has got.
I think one of the key reasons why that application has been with the District Council for probably around 4 years now is because of its huge complexity. And with respect, I don't agree with the point that residents have been ignored, because there's been extensive exchanges of views and correspondence with the residents and the authority and Environment Agency and so on and so forth to try and make sure that all of the issues that that application poses have been looked into and addressed. So that's why it's taken as long as it has. There's been extensive resident engagement and all of the points have been taken very, very seriously. And as I say, that's the reason why it's taken 4 years and we still haven't had a decision on that. But clearly a decision needs to be reached on that. And at the point when that application does come before the Planning Committee for determination, I'm sure residents and members and the like will take all of those points into account in making a decision at that time. But it's through no lack of engagement and effort to make sure that everybody is aware of the issues, that every issue has been properly looked at, and that we can reach a view, or the Planning Committee can reach a view in due course.
Did you want to go back?
I asked the council, I think at an open meeting, would it be 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that a separate independent assessment be made of the water problem that leaves the well of water in the Wold.
Well, I'm not close enough to the details of that application, but if you've got any outstanding questions around that, then please direct them to my colleague Chris Whitmore in our development management team. They'll be able to tell you exactly what's happened and when.
I think the problem that worries me, I don't think the understanding of it. Well, certainly with what's going on in the bottom of the river and what happens on the top, there's just a feeling generally that, we can sort this out. I don't think it's really understood what a big is and the worse the effect it will have on the town. That's my great feeling.
Sorry, madam, I can't agree with you. There's been a lot of work done on floods in this area. There are two areas of problems here. One is the river. The water's coming off the moors. This valley's flooded for many years, but through the climate change, DEFRA used to estimate that we had floods 1 in 100 years. Now that's, of course, completely out the window, because this last, 2-3 decades, we're getting them quite frequent. So there has been a lot of work. I know I've worked closely with Chris Whitmore, and I know there's been a lot of work done on this. And we've investigated it with the MP. That's why you've seen £5 million come in to do the river. But the bigger problem, and again, I was at this meeting in Nottingham yesterday, where the conversations on a workshop was around zero carbon and flooding. And the government have instructed that we've got to work reasonably on this issue, and that, monies have got to come in. So we're hopeful that this, as Mr. Wilson spoke about, that devolution deal on the East Midlands Combined Authority will bring significant amounts of more monies into this area. One of the big problems we've got to find is to get catchment areas for flood water where it's a drainage problem. We simply can't get it away into the river. And so that's the work process, but it is fully understood.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. And as Mr. Wilson said, if you do want to email Chris Whitmore at Derbyshire Dales, and you'd copy myself, Councillor Purdy, into your question.
Any questions? Well,
please do. Thank you. Councillor Wayne.
Because the flood warden, Matlock, really. I quite agree with Councillor Purdy with what he's just mentioned. I have been working very close since I became flood warden 3 years ago. The Environment Agency with the local flood team, the Derbyshire County Council, emergency. There are serious issues. There is a serious issue with the flood wall currently. That's being remedied. Thank you to the Environment Agency for coming and doing it. It needed doing. But as Ms Doherty pointed out on her radio interview, that's going to do nothing for the flooding in Bakewell Road. And what I'm disappointed about, and just to come back to you, Mr Wilson, it's taken a hard slog from when I got elected as a councillor in 2019 to get the voices heard, and it's taken a hard slog of canvassing people and having to go myself to the Severn Trent Water and find out about surface water runoff and what they can take into there. I know you'll say that it's not an issue for the council, but it is an issue for the council because there's a 70% disparity with what the developer said could be accepted into the Severn Trent infrastructure and what actually could. That's a significant amount of water. And what I am disappointed with is that we've got Derbyshire Dales District Council in their risk management plan of surface water. I forget who did it, but a company did a report about 5 or 6 years ago, and they identified that this Bentley Brook catchment is highly sensitive catchment, and that goes up to Mrs Rains is saying and to what the other speakers have said, and that's within the gift of the Derbyshire Dales District Council to act upon. And secondly, we've got Derbyshire County Council in their Section 19 flood report of 2019 that identify that over-urbanisation of the hills above Matlock are a significant contributory factor to the flooding at Bakewell Road and the rest of the town in Bentley Brook. So what I'm saying is both those organisations, one of which you're the Chief Executive and Councillor Purdy is the leader of, and obviously Derbyshire County Council, seem to be contradicting what they're saying. I mean, why are we've got another one going to planning committee on next Tuesday, opposite the golf club, which is being recommended for approval. But and part of that is down to housing numbers, and that goes on to another point that one of the people mentioned about, it's to do with how many. I mean, surely we've got an opportunity now as a district council and a community to say about, let's keep our beautiful spaces, let's not spoil our beautiful open greenfield sites and do that. But I just feel as though it's a bit hypocritical to have it in documents and then go against those documents and continue to authorise planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. As I say, we can't really talk about planning applications that come in specific ones, but if there's a general comment you wanted to make, Paul.
I think the key thing is that nobody's gone against anything yet because the application still remains undetermined. So, you know, there's 3 years body of evidence, if you like, which has been gleaned through, you know, the magnificent efforts of the Wolds Action Group and people such as yourself, Councillor Wayne, to bring these matters to the attention of the authority as the decision maker. Now, in many respects, you know, the authority as planning authority, whilst it's the ultimate arbiter of that application, it is in the middle of a developer who will say one thing and the statutory agencies who may say something completely different. And that is why it's important that all of the information is properly analysed, properly put out there, and ultimately put in front of the planning committee to make that decision. So yes, it has been a slog for everybody, I think, but the important thing is we need to get to the point whereby all issues have been properly looked at such that a balanced decision can be made. And hopefully that effort will pay off, because, you know, we do need to get to that point for everybody's interest.
So, if we look at an LPA, a local planning authority within this organisation, and you get an area, and there are many other things. I mean, one of the first things, I forgot to say this before I started, I think it's excellent that you've all taken time, just going off on a tangent, but that's what I'm very good at. But it's marvellous that you've all taken the time to come here, and I'm quite disappointed by the turnout of people, because many people want to get on the old keyboard and have a go on Facebook, but at the end of the day, you've all done a day's work and you're all here, and some of the things that you've actually gone and taken the time to explain have been excellent, and it shows the hard work that this council does, and thanks very much for that. I'd just like to say that. But I just think, going back to the LPA, the cumulative that Mrs. Ranger was mentioning, I mean, it is a significant thing, the cumulative. We should, at the local plan stage, we should have been looking at the cumulative impact of building all these houses that lead into the Bentley Brook. And the impact, I mean, I went to a meeting the other day, and the Bentley Brook area-wide catchment plan is very close on conclusion, and I was really shocked by the volumes of water that may be proffering up. So it's something that I would be very cautious about. It's coming out soon, but it was significant. So why is the LPA not flagging up? And I know they're not. They've got our best interests. You as the chief executive and you as a leader have got our best interests as the communities at heart. But why can't they flag up to Severn Trent Water? Because that's who basically. Why can't they flag up and say, we're really concerned? You know, we're building all these things here. Can you tell us that it's working out cumulatively? Is that ever done?
This is going back to when Coalition brought out a manifesto for the total numbers of houses and the formula that was devised for all local authorities. Because at that time, the Liberal Democrats came out with the need for more houses, numbers, than the other two parties. So we've been subject to a dictate from government on a formula. Yeah? So that we've been dictated to by government. Coalition started it. So with respect, your party, they wanted more. Well, okay, you probably went then. But the fact is, they came out with more figures for need for building the country. So we were given a figure which we refused to accept on the basis that there was no infrastructure monies towards the build. And so our local plan was refused. If I'm sure Councillor Barefoot's nodding, you weren't here then, but it was refused at the first hurdle because we said, no, we're not going to build those many houses because there isn't infrastructure. We did our damn best to fight it, but we were overturned by a government inspector who came back and said, you will now build more houses. I had a talk with a then housing minister, there'd been a number since, but if you remember, there was a design that won an award on Edgefield Road. And how many years ago at that, he came to visit and I said to him, he said, it's not your decision, Councillor Purdy, to question infrastructure, just get the houses built. So what we're trying to do now is move away from the numbers game. And that's why we're developing the SPDs on climate change, on design, on the environment, and recognising as well, because you know I brought in the emergency climate debate as leader, because that overtook us in 2018-19, and all local authorities had to deal with climate change. It's been significant since then. And we recognise that the floods are not one in 100 years, they're probably every 5 years now, or even every 2 years. So I don't agree with your argument that it's not been looked at. It is being looked at very close. I know Chris Moore's had all the responses back and he's waiting responses back from the developer. So it is being looked at, it is being acknowledged, but I think we're in a position now where there's this fundamental change that climate change is affecting us. But I don't see anything in all the dictate from government. I don't know if Mr. Wilson wants to argue with me on this point. I've never known anything where we've had to recognise a cumulative effect. You can only deal with the planning application on its merit. I'm not aware of anything where it says a cumulative.
Yeah. So, Mr. Wilson, have we ever raised anything with the prospective statutory consultees in relation to how the cumulative effect works and the impact of building so many houses having an impact into a sensitive area? Thank you.
Well, that isn't an issue which is looked at in detail at the point that you formulate a local plan. So the local plan will only deal with strategic distribution of housing and very high level impacts. It won't go into the level of detail that clearly you go into in consideration of a planning application. But in terms of those cumulative impacts now, particularly in respect of the Wolds, my understanding, and I'm not totally close to it, but my understanding is that there has been a lot of dialogue with the relevant agencies to try and understand that. That might not be the normal course, if I'm honest, in respect of other less significant planning applications, but clearly when you're dealing with 400 plus houses in a very sensitive location such as the Wolds, given the history of flooding within Matlock, it would be wrong not to look at those issues. And I come back to the point, that is why it's taken the best part of 3-4 years for that application to still remain undetermined. But it is getting to the point now whereby I think pretty much all of the questions have been asked, and hopefully we have the relevant answers to put before members. I hope so.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Thank you, Steve. Notice two ladies want to put a hand up, but you've not spoken yet. The gentleman there, if you'd like to speak, please.
I'm really interested in the mayoral combined authority that you kindly spoke about. You said at one stage that this authority wouldn't cede any of the activities to the mayoral authority. Also, you said, I think, if I understood it correctly, that you would have certain numbers of representatives that would sit on that combined authority, and it would be the mayor that decides which of the representatives is able to vote on specific issues. So the question I've got, I think strategically it's great, but in terms of the implementation, are you confident that your representatives here will be able to speak up and actually take the relevant amount of budgets that might be allocated, so we're not disenfranchised, if you like, in terms of resources, because the level of deprivation, for instance, in Nottinghamshire may well be different to here. And do you have the confidence that we will bring the resources we are rightly owed, if you like?
It's a very good question, but a very difficult question to answer with any certainty. Because the way that the situation will work is that the districts and boroughs of Derbyshire, they will have 2 representatives, but that's 2 to cover all of the district councils. So the district and borough councils across Derbyshire will need to determine which 2 representatives are to represent the collective. And the same happens, or will happen, in Nottinghamshire. So it may not be a Derbyshire Dales elected member who is selected as one of the 2. That is a matter still to be determined. But I think the key thing is, and this is a point that I made to our members only a week or so ago, is that whilst there are some legitimate concerns regarding the mayoral combined authority arrangements, I think from the point of view of the district council having an ability to exert a degree of influence is really important, because, as I said to our members, if you're not at the table, then you can't exert any influence at all. So the ambition for this authority, I'm sure, I can't speak for the politicians, but I'm sure that they would want to try and make sure that there is adequate representation. If it's not one of our own members, that it is at least a member from another Derbyshire authority who understands the Derbyshire Dales and the issues that rural authorities such as ours face. So,
I suppose really what is behind some of my thinking is that the level of deprivation in certain parts of Nottinghamshire very different to, and what you will find, I used to live in Yorkshire, in Ilkley. Now Bradford would get all the resources, Ilkley would get very little, whether it be housing, policing, etc., etc., etc. So safeguarding, if you like, the resources for this community compared to quite rightly the deserved resources for a deprived area elsewhere, but nonetheless we will be drained of some of those resources. And it's almost a safety net as to where that sits as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, that will be a very significant decision that probably the leaders of the individual district councils between them will have to determine who their representatives are to be. And I think all of those issues, no doubt, will come into consideration.
Derbyshire Dales, with the Chief Executive and myself as leader, we played a very strong role in the development of this, which goes back a bit over 2 years now, when the county council leader, Councillor Barry Lewis, called a meeting at Junction 28, and all the leaders and chief execs decided we did not want a mayor, perversely, because at that time we hadn't got the white paper. We weren't in full knowledge of what the government really wanted. We sort of knew they wanted a mayor, but we felt that it wasn't right for the shires. So we started the vision of Vision Derbyshire and working collaboratively together. It's fair to say that some of the Derbyshire councils fell along the way, and there were 4 main councils that carried on with Vision Derbyshire. And so we've been very strong at that table, and I'm working as hard as I can to try and ensure that one of those representatives is from this authority. No matter who it is, I want this authority at that table. And I'm hopeful that another authority, who I won't mention, is at that same table, because they've worked as hard as we have at Vision Derbyshire. But if I can liken you to the LEP, the local authority, the local enterprise partnership, we're only allowed 1 representative on there. And so we leaders voted amongst us which should represent us on that forum, and that's Councillor Tricia Gilby at Chesterfield. But she always feeds back to us when she attends a meeting, and we feed back into her what really the council wants. Now, if we're not at that table, we'll still have the 2 representatives of Derbyshire to address our need. And I completely hear your voice, because it is a worry for our rural area. We have serious deprivation areas, even in rural areas, and it is a concern. And over the years, much funding on rural attributes has been lost. And so I'm really pleased now when the white paper, we were astonished when the white paper came out, quite frankly, because it made us realise, we've got to have a mayor, because the funding part was, as we are now, with a diminishing budget at level 1. Level 2 was a county deal, so you could have had just the county as a combined authority, but that only gave small extra powers and small extra monies. The real deal, the one that you really couldn't refuse, was that all the powers are divested from government to the East Midlands Combined Authority, but you have to have a mayor. Now, what Councillor Lewis is intent on, and the 4 leaders now of Nottingham City, Nottinghamshire, Derby City and Derbyshire are intent on, is having a cabinet system somewhat similar to the West Midlands construct. And that is that they have in their governance arrangements, and our officer James McLaughlin is part and parcel of the work piece on that governance, is to make it that the Mayor of West Midlands has a different role to the Mayor of Manchester, for example. And in my view, it's a better sort of governance arrangement, to put it that way. I don't want to get too technical. But if we can work on that model, I see that an excellent example. And if you look at the figures at what West Midlands Mayoral Combined Authorities pulled in, and how far we are behind in an East Midlands context, we are billions of pounds out of pocket. So whilst people are arguing there's not much money on the table for now, it's the starting point, and that can increase 5-7-fold. So I see this as a great advantage for the East Midlands, for business, for opportunities, for education, etc., etc. I just would like our authority to be at that table for reasons you state.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Got 2 more questions, 2 more ladies. Put your hand up before the lady in the stripy jumper. Did you want to speak again? No. You're fine. Okay. Mrs. Rains.
I don't know how the would affect Derbyshire Dales and would treated fairly as
Sorry, I can't hear Mr. Rains. Can you speak up?
mine was to do with the devolution. It was how would it affect Derbyshire Dales and how would we be worse off It would be still paying. Get extra money on top of this as part of the devolution. How can you assure that we would get the share that, how's it shared out? I mean, you know, would Derbyshire Dales get a fair share?
I think it's fair to say that those mechanisms have got to be worked out yet. The fact is that extra monies are being brought into the East Midlands Mayoral Combined Authority, and that can increase from the starting point now fivefold, sevenfold. So that's bound to be a benefit generally. We can only say we've got to be at that table. If we're not, we'll work with our representative who is on the East Midlands Combined Authority. We still retain sovereignty, we still retain our powers, and obviously we'll lever in as much money as we can to this area as possible, on the basis that the rural areas have lost out to the urban areas. And I have to tell you, in all honesty, the 4 leaders of this constituent authorities are very keen, extremely keen, that the district and borough councils are involved.
Councillor Birdie. Steve, last question, because we've got 5 more minutes, so have you got a...
I'm keen that the district and borough councils are involved. Well, from your research and being there at the table, what concerns me is an added precept, which you mentioned earlier on. Obviously, I think we had it at a council meeting the other day where we were discussing different areas. Councillor O'Brien raised an issue. There's a lot of disparity between Somerset or Bristol or somewhere like that. Their mayor gets a lot more money than up here. How many of those that already got mayors have implemented precepts? Because that's the concern. We all see, like up in Northumberland, in Tees area with their mayor, what a marvellous job they're doing. But that's in the city centres, you know, in the urbanised areas. We never ever see what the impact is on the rural areas, like we are. But we would still, the residents here, it's a financial crisis and this, that and the other, it's likely they may have to pay a precept. And if we're getting a quality of service and we're getting a result out of it, I don't have an issue with it. But how many of those that are already there have got precepts? If it's not something, you know, it's just an idea. That's all.
I know that Greater Manchester has. My understanding is that not many others have, but I don't have an exact number for you. But clearly that could be looked into. But I mean, all I can say is to reflect upon the discussions that we've been party to, and the upper tier authorities are extremely sensitive to that issue of imposing another tax upon council taxpayers. And the indications that certainly I've heard is that there is great reluctance to do that, because the Mayoral Combined Authority will receive development funding from government to establish and run their office. And the expectation politically, I understand, is that basically the affairs of the Mayoral Combined Office are contained within that central government funding pot. Clearly it would be a political decision at whatever point in time is made, but they are the indications that I've heard so far.
It's new territory, Steve. We are the first county deal to get an East Midlands Mayoral Combined Authority on the table. It's not fixed yet, it's not law yet, there's a consultation on, but it's looking likely that we'll end up in 2024 with a mayor. So we are in new ground. And I, again, was at a meeting in Nottingham yesterday where a similar question was asked, and all 4 leaders answered the same as Mr. Wilson just come. The argument was we've put in that extra layer of bureaucracy on. Their argument was, no, we're not. What we're doing in actual fact, government's giving us powers from central government to East Midlands for us to deal with, and extra monies.
Let's hope it's the Mayor of Derbyshire, not the Sheriff of Matlock.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming along this evening. Some very interesting questions. Can I remind you that you do have your ward councillors that you can contact if you do need any help or advice. They work well with our officers here, and thank our officers for their presentations as well. I'm sure we've all learnt a lot. Safe journey home, everyone. Thank you.